How difficult is it to write a theme, Austin?
What a way to kick it off.
Like, how do you even start?
First of all, I just saw
on.
his eye twitch because the second that you say the word theme, he's gonna go, God damn it.
No,
okay."
no, that was the correct use of the term, and I think it is, broadly speaking, the hardest thing to do. I think because it
I thought breaking up was the hardest.
Yeah, or moving, right? Moving house.
I think
Coming up with a theme for the house move. That's the
I
hardest
think
thing.
it was the composer Arnold Schoenberg that said the two hardest things to do in life are end a relationship and figure out how to end a trill. That was his little take on that. But yeah, sometimes it just comes. Sometimes you just it just clicks, and like any other creative work, right? You sometimes just sit down and go, oh, I mean, like Mike, didn't you say on Thomas Was Alone that the foundational sort of prototype was like practically just all there in a flash?
It was like, it was Dave's first thing he sent me was just, that's it, that's the music, yeah.
No,
I
I
mean
mean
how
the
long
game
he might have
itself.
spent 5 weeks on that, though, in fairness, before he
I don't
sent
mean
it
the
to me, so
music.
I don't know.
The actual game
No,
itself.
I mean, like, didn't the premise of the game come out from you in a flash, relatively speaking? Like,
It was that was a quick weekend kind of thing, yeah.
Exactly.
But that's not the same as I think you're selling yourself short. I think what's interesting about like a musical theme is it's so central to the final presentation, right? Like the theme tune to a TV show, it's the first thing you think of when you think of Law and Order is the theme tune, right? So it's not an idea or a general. I'm sure the idea of like let's do a crime show that follows the process is one thing, but like a theme is something that has to last decades and
I mean,
I'm
just
totally consistent to things that don't even necessarily exist yet in some cases.
Right, yeah.
What do you mean?
Well, like if you're making a theme to a TV show, you have to understand the core of whatever that TV show is well enough that the theme will be consistent with whatever the core pieces are moving on, even as the show changes.
And still be appropriate as it scales.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, the long and short of it is, I meant only to draw the comparison to Thomas Was Alone insofar as sometimes things just come easily, and sometimes it's a lot of work to feel like you've even got the bones of it. Like the theme to Journey, for example, was one where Genova told me the premise of what the game was going to be. Like this was like a week after Flower had launched, and he and I had a meeting, and he said, I want to tell you about the new game, and he gave me this kind of spiel that was actually pretty close to what Journey ended up being. Very simplified and missing a lot of stuff, obviously, but it was kind of the premise of this character going through a kind of metaphorical stages of life. And he said, maybe the next week or two, some kind of melody, some kind of theme to just help. Because he likes to use music the way teams use concept art, where he said, I want there to be a piece that everyone can look to if they feel like they're kind of drifting off course. They're not sure if this tonally fits the world and all that. I want there to be a piece we all agree, like if it feels compatible with how this music makes you feel, you're on the right track. So to him, having music early that's signed off on is a big part of his creative process. And so he said, I'd love a theme. I don't think Matt Nava had even started making concept art yet. He was the art director at the time. And I certainly hadn't seen any by that point. It was literally the first chat we had. And that was one of those cases where what he described was so kind of evocative that by the time I walked to my car, I had it. Because I remember I left myself a voicemail going, okay, cello starts, ba 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 ba, and then I called my cellist Tina and I said, can you meet me at the studio in an hour? And hauled ass back to Burbank, recorded her that day. And if you listen, and sent it to him that afternoon with the strings in the background were fake, but she was real, and the flute played by Amy Tatum was also real. And so if you listen to the first track on the album called Nascence, that's that same exact recording of her playing cello. We never changed it in 3 years of development, but then there's real string orchestra behind her that was recorded fully 2.5 years later. But not one note of it was changed. But that's like one of those where I got lucky. It just kind of dawned on me, and I was like, okay. And then I sent it, and they could have easily said, nah, this is too whatever. They could have had a million points of feedback. It's too slow. It's too lonely. It's too this or it's too that, or it's not. We want we want something more exciting and adventurous, or who knows, as it turned out, they felt like this stuck the landing. So we went with it. But I've had plenty others where, like Monaco with Andy Schatz, which was not much after that, was one where I wrote like 1,000 themes before we felt like, okay, this one is it. Because every time it was like, this is okay, but it's too like dark, or this one's not dark enough. I mean, it ended up being this needle, through the eye of a needle kind of a thing.
I wonder how often, especially with TV shows, Alanah, since you bring that up, has the showrunner, the creator, or someone put it in the context of, okay, when the viewers, the first thing they're going to see is this cold open, or the first thing they're going to hear is the theme, and how does that first frame, or how does the rest of the show, which obviously is going to have other pieces of music that are helping to support those more nuanced moments and just the broad theme that just kind of sells that. But I wonder how often they go, that theme actually sets tonally. If you start to veer off course, it becomes that kind of passive bumper rail that guides you back to the original ethos of the show. I don't know.
You'd be surprised.
Does that happen with games though? Because it feels like the games, like Pathless, you were writing as they were devving, right? So it's not like a film score where the film is done and then you're scoring it. You're doing it truncated. You're doing it in kind of like a concatenation kind of way, right? You're not really.
It's just part of the development process.
But how often do you go, oh, you know what? Now that you've done this new thing, now you've added this new level, now that there's this new character, this piece that I did, have you ever gone back and retracted a piece that you did?
100%.
Because it's like, that doesn't work.
Oh, absolutely. We make discoveries down the road where we realize, oh, crap, this thing has evolved into something it really wasn't before, and required total rewrite, or if at minimum updates. Abzu was one of those where I wrote the theme that it did stick the landing straight out of the gate, but then the actual execution of how that score was put together changed a lot over those 3 years. And before we finished it, I went and I kind of did a polish pass on the theme that did fairly substantial changes to it, but the core melody stayed the same and the core idea of it stayed the same. But just as we were getting ready to record, I was like, it's not really written for the instruments that I wrote the rest of the score for, and I kind of need to get it in line.
We had a conversation the other day where we were talking about how I would go out. The difference between us is between faith and fact, I think is how we framed it or whatever. And I said that I will go out to, I can't remember how I said, but you talked about the temptation to go out and find the facts to support your faith, as opposed to going out and discovering some truth as it is. Do you feel there's ever been a part where you wrote something and maybe even in the back of your mind, you knew that didn't necessarily fit, but it was so hard to let go of because you had put in so much time and energy and effort that you this could actually still support this, even though it's fundamentally against
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's kind of a sign of being earlier in your career, just because that stubbornness tends to be like, you learn to let go of and be less precious about things the farther in you get, because it's just the nature of collaboration. And almost always when you do another pass, it's better. Like the cruelest lesson of that for me has always been when the computer crashes and I lose like a day of work, and I go and I rewrite it and it's better, and I just know it's better. And I think if I had genuine balls as a creative person, I would delete at the end of the day. I'd like build it into my schedule to have this 2-to-1 ratio of work a day, delete everything, next day redo that work, knowing that every time I've been required to do that due to faulty, corrupt files or whatever, the writing somehow is because I remember the best parts of it and can recreate them, and then the rest is just the benefit of doing it a second time.
But you lose the visceral of that inspired thing, though.
It's true. I mean, the composing is one of those fascinating things because it, like game development, it's a slow process. I saw this great quote on Instagram the other day that I reshared, where somebody said animation, but this applies to music and composing and a lot of other things, where they said animation is like telling a joke and then 3 years later seeing if someone laughed. And I was like, that's a really spot on way to describe music as well, because Leonard Bernstein said that the greatest music should feel like it was born spontaneously into the air, that it's not the process of this slow, meticulous, like one note here, one note there, where after hours and hours and hours and hours of work, you have maybe 30 seconds of music. He's like, when you hear it, it should feel like it just sprang forth. So the act of writing has to somehow preserve that spontaneity. It's really hard, but sometimes, you get lucky. But to
It's
your
like theater. It has to be fresh every night.
yeah, which is like theater actors completely blow my mind for that ability. The one technical craft part of it that I get is just that notion of finding little moments in each performance to kind of dig into, and then maybe it's this scene that we kind of approach fresh in some way and it keeps us on our toes. But tomorrow night it's going to be this other scene, and I can kind of understand the idea of how you get there. But broadly speaking, you look at like our mutual friend, Mr. Rapp, doing year after year after year of Rent, and just thinking like how you can do that. It blows my mind. But the last thing I will say about TV themes is very often it's not the composer who's scoring the show, which is why, like you look at something like Game of Thrones, where Ramin Djawadi wrote the theme and scored the show, but that's actually not so common. And maybe in the 90s and in the 80s, it was more common, where they would go, basically the convention was, let's go get some movie big shot to do our theme, and then one of those gutter trash TV composers will do our show. Like that was the perception for the longest time. TV was where art went to die musically, and that
there was
has
a brief
evolved
moment where that was also the case in games, right? That I remember a weird period, like I think it was it Mass Effect 2 that had Clint Mansell do the
3.
theme, and then 3.
Yeah.
And I feel like there were lots of games in that specific era where they had the famous composer do, or Fable, where it was
Fable. I was gonna say, it was Danny Elfman wrote the theme,
who
and then
totally then used that theme for the Avengers and got away with it, which I love.
Wait,
well,
what?
Elfman didn't score. Elfman was a co-composer on Age of Ultron, but he didn't score the first.
So it's on the Age of Ultron. I'm not kidding.
What?
The end credit, I think it's the end credits music of Age of Ultron, is the Fable theme tune.
Huh.
I haven't listened to
very
Fable in so
similar.
long that I don't even really remember it. I will go. I mean, the thing is, if you listen
not to curse Elfman in this special house that we
Sounds good.
No. Believe me, I love Elfman. I was going to use him as an example, by the way, of like, if you look at the way TV royalties are paid out, the designation, every single piece of music in a given episode of TV has a designation of what type of music it is. So you have, like, the most common would be what's called BI, background instrumental, which is basically underscore, normal composer score. Background vocals, which would be like a licensed song that's playing over a montage or something like that. Those, they've tweaked the formula, but for years, those paid like 6 times more second by second than the score, which was always, it's because a bunch of songwriters basically were in charge of deciding these royalty payouts, because it always pissed off composers that basically you work your ass off to score a piece of thing, but if you're some band that just had a piece of music dropped in by a music supervisor, you could make, for one scene, you could make as much as the composer for the whole episode. But the title theme also, but this makes total sense, is justifiably paid out at a higher per, second
Do you know the
rate.
Gene Roddenberry story about that? That Gene Roddenberry managed to get a cut of the theme tune royalties on Star Trek. Have you heard this story?
I didn't. I know that Alexander Courage wrote the actual theme. I didn't know that Roddenberry had any.
So Gene Roddenberry got half of the for his lifetime, got half of the royalties for the usage of the Star Trek theme song. Austin, using your knowledge of the industry, how do you think he did it?
Well, he probably, it's probably something ridiculous, like he's the lyricist of is that it?
He wrote lyrics for Star Trek. It's like,
No
"My
way.
love is beyond the stars," or something like that. and he wrote that down and then claimed that the title sequence to Star Trek is an instrumental version of his song.
No.
So hilarious.
Which is a collaboration with the original composer. So he managed. Gene Roddenberry did some stuff.
You know who genuinely did co-write the themes of their shows, though, is J.J. Abrams, who he basically, if you look at Alias and Lost, he basically, worked out some very basic stuff. Michael Giacchino wrote all the scores, but J.J. did the theme, which is basically like opening GarageBand. And I mean, I'm being a little dismissive, but it's basically just sounds kind of stacked together. It's not really composition. I'm sure he'd be the first to acknowledge that, but that's relatively. But Elfman, the joke was always that he has made almost as much money for what he claims was 3 hours of work to write. That was an afternoon for him, and they sent it off, and they said, "Cool, we like it," and no changes. And and then in almost 30 years of that, or over 30 years of that, playing Alf Clausen, who did 600 plus episodes of the show before finally being replaced a couple years ago.
What?
Oh yeah, they got rid of him. And it's all done now under Hans Zimmer's collective of TV music called Bleeding Fingers that does a lot of all the BBC stuff now is done through them as well. All Planet
Wait,
Earth
but they changed the theme to The Simpsons?
No, the score, the composer of the show week over week. The theme has not been touched, but Alf Clausen, after scoring something like 600 plus episodes of the show, I think in general they were kind of downsizing cost because they used to record a pretty sizable orchestra every week, and they've cut that down to about 20 people per week, which is still more than most TV shows. But
Family Guy has a massive, like they do a full band, like full.
It's about the same actually as The Simpsons. Family Guy would do like 45 people or so, except in rare occasions. Family Guy actually made some history a number of 10 plus years ago where they had, at the time, I think Bear actually managed to nudge them out for an episode of either The Cape, a very short-lived show that didn't even last one season, or Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. But at the time, the largest orchestra ever recorded for a TV show was this episode of Family Guy, where they got like a 92-piece orchestra or something for a single gag, for a single cue.
Wow.
This just shows you Seth MacFarlane's obsession with music, where there's an episode...
Was that the Shapoopy?
No, that's the thing. It's a thing that they could have easily licensed, but they didn't.
I respect it.
I love him to death. What happened was there's a gag where Peter gets a promotion and therefore gets to use the executive bathroom. And so he's taking a helicopter and he goes, "Where is this bathroom?" And then you see Mr. Attenborough go there, and they do the whole Jurassic Park helicopter. They re-recorded that music as part of a Family Guy scoring session episode, just for fun. All the big, all the big Jurassic Park arrival sequence, but with the correct notes. And
I was going to say that was embarrassing bad.
It was
you just
terrible.
played Jurassic Park
Right,
from
right,
our memory, like,
Without even actually looking at it.
just
that
awful, just absolutely toned down.
Much better with the 90-piece orchestra. Another great, I'm monopolizing all this, but there's another great Seth MacFarlane music story that I just love. Like he's a guy that is basically loaded with talent, shitloads of money, and has no drug problems. So his vice is spending on music. Mm-hmm. And famously, every year for his birthday, he hires a 100-piece orchestra and does a full-on performance at his house. Because every year, all my musician friends around LA get the call to go play his house party, and he'll have like Alan Silvestri come and conduct like Back to the Future, just so he can show off to all of his friends, like his cool music friends. And fuck, I know, driving me nuts. And
has he seen you play Jurassic Park like that? Because that could get you in.
Yeah.
I did.
Gateway.
I did once find myself standing next to him at a urinal, and I was incredibly drunk, and I really wanted to say how much I and all other composers loved his obvious love for that art form. But I was like, this is just not a good context for that. But
hey, man, nice dick. Also, huge fan.
Yeah, exactly. No, but so
we've all been there.
One great
smoke for me once.
One great last story with him musically was that on that Western he did, A Million Ways to Die in the West, there's this grand old tradition of composers writing like this big musical tour de force kind of tour through their score for the end credits of movies. John Williams has famously written a lot of great end credits suites like E.T., where he just goes through all the kind of highlights, but in new ways that you don't hear elsewhere in the movie. And a lot of times nowadays, end credit music is basically they just take random bits of the score and edit it together. And there's nothing written bespoke for the credits. But the old-fashioned tradition was to use that as like your little playground to kind of strut your stuff where you're not having to worry about what's on screen, and you get to kind of have fun with the material that was written for the score. So, of course, that's what Seth MacFarlane always wants on his movies. And so on A Million Ways to Die in the West, he worked with Joel McNeely, who he had been a fan of because of his work on the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles TV show and a bunch of other stuff since then. And Joel also works on Family or American Dad and stuff. And so he does this big old fashioned like Tombstone and Magnificent Seven, like this love letter to the classic kind of Americana Westerns. And they write an end credit piece and he loves it and it's amazing. But then they realize from a focus test that the credits are literally just scroll, or maybe not even that. They look in the edit bay, maybe the credits are moving too fast. They just have to slow them down. So it's going to add, it was like a minute and 20 seconds to the credits. And so now the music isn't the right timing because, it was written precisely to the length that they had planned on, which was however many minutes. So Joel goes, no, it's no big deal. I'll just edit in some stuff. And Seth goes, the hell you will. And he's like, don't you want to write another minute 20 to just give it that much more? And he's like, well, we already recorded the orchestra. And then Seth just like gets out his checkbook practically and out of his own pocket, bear in mind that you're talking about a full orchestra, probably 100 people. And you have to book them in 3-hour blocks of time minimum. So for an extra minute and 20 seconds, which is, we're talking about 15 minutes of max, a couple of takes, and then you're out. Like nowhere near the 3-hour minimum. Seth personally paid, not out of the film's budget, to hire 3 hours of this 100-piece orchestra just so that the credits could be the full length and Joel McNeely could write his full length. I was like, man, this guy, he's just nuts. I just love it.
I love that. I love people being passionate about something.
Oh, he so is. He so is. Yeah. When the first Cosmos, like season 1 a couple years ago, or 10 years ago now, or whatever that was, when that aired, I remember looking at his Twitter, because they got Alan Silvestri to score that show and do the theme, and he won an Emmy for that theme. I remember looking, opening night, Seth MacFarlane, he executive produced that show. He's the reason it existed. He went to Fox and convinced them, let's do this and make it primetime like it should be. And so he didn't, he was very behind the scenes on it, but he was crucial to how that happened. And so when it goes to launch, I remember thinking, his Twitter is going to be like, here we go, everybody watch Cosmos or whatever. But his Twitter opening night was, I'm at the launch party and I'm hanging with Alan Silvestri. And I was like, he's just awesome.
Priorities, man.
It's just, yeah. Anyway.
On that note, hi everyone. Welcome to Play, Watch, Listen. I'm Alanah. I'm from Troy Baker. I was going to say Troy Breaker.
Love it.
Rag Briffle. And Austin Winter.
Michael Biffle.
Hey, you can't get his name right. You're going to get everybody else's wrong.
Rostin.
And I'm Flablana Gears.
Yes.
Gerflud, Schnefne, Sneflud.
Flablana Gears 5.
It's a sim. I was going to say, I don't have any point to this story, but just in case you guys haven't seen it, did you see what they've done with the band in Cyberpunk? No. It is a real-world band that they hired to play an American band, being Samurai. They've released a song, but it's basically the singer who is, I don't remember where they're from, but has to sing in an American accent and try to sort of sound like Johnny Silverhand being Keanu Reeves. It just seems like this like very interesting
this
like
layered This
project.
feels like the Jimmy Fallon thing of getting, the guests to sing like the Barney song as Ariana Grande or whatever. That bit that he does.
Yeah.
This feels like you're going down that.
Yeah, so it's a Swedish punk band called Refused, who I had not heard of, but I've heard of, fairly popular. And yeah, they have to sing, or they had to create this entire band in game, which is called Samurai, and are releasing music leading up to the game's release, while trying to sing in a different accent as a character that nobody's even seen yet, which just seems so complicated, and it's so cool.
But as Keanu, like they're trying to sound like him.
Yeah, but I mean,
I don't think they
Dogstar,
do,
right?
but-
Like, I'm surprised that like Keanu didn't.
That's what I'm thinking. Is like he's
Push to-
Mr. Yes. I'm surprised he wouldn't just do it himself.
May not have the vocal ability to
He'd do it
sing
anyway.
punk
though,
music?
Alanah. He'd go for
Yeah,
it.
it doesn't matter. Like that was the whole. There was that big in the '90s, especially. There was that bit. I mean, and even what's his name? Keith.
Olbermann.
No, Kiefer Sutherland has his band. Russell Crowe has his band. Keanu Reeves had his band, the Bacon Brothers, which I think Kevin Bacon actually produced for a while. He produced this band called
I didn't know about that
the
one.
Long Pigs. They're a British band. You remember them, Mike Bithell? Probably not. But that's like the whole
I'll
vanity
check in with the
project
British. One
thing.
second. What was it called?
Please.
I'll yell out the window.
The Long Pigs.
Ask-
Give it the
ask,
Long Pigs.
uh,
That's a
Long
British term
Pigs.
even.
Please ring Her Majesty and
Yeah.
Hello? Yes, Mr. Bithell. How can I help you? Yes, Mum. Long Pigs. Oh, yes, Kevin Bacon's band. I believe they produced yes.
See, if you need a band
I like
for a
how
video
that's
game
basically
that sounds like
Stewie
it's
does the
fronted by
Queen.
the Queen, you've got your star there. Right?
There you
That's-
go.
The
It's
Long Pigs.
Yeah, I
I
found
did
it,
not know that.
just
What
found
is
it, the cyberpunk thing super interesting. It's like I love how meta that is, and apparently
They've left no stone unturned with that thing.
Yeah, apparently, according to the Cyberpunk Wiki, they are a legendary Chrome rock band that split up after the keyboardist Nancy murdered her abusive husband by putting him out the window of their 83rd floor apartment. So, hope Nancy's
Wait.
doing better.
That'll do it.
Wait, that's not the fiction. That is the actual real thing.
No, that is the fiction. It's written that
I
way.
was
Oh,
gonna say what 83rd.
I was like,
Yeah.
wow,
Both
that's
fell for
amazing.
it.
Like,
I was like,
logistically,
poor
how do you come
Nancy.
back from it? Yeah.
Yeah, I hope Nancy's doing all right.
Alright.
Yeah, no, they.
I don't understand.
It definitely didn't ping
detailed
as
drama.
believable to me because I thought, what Swedish building is 83 stories?
Oh, I was gonna say the same thing. What building anywhere is like? Where's he
Too
live in
tall.
Dubai?
Way too tall. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
nuts.
That's what threw it off for you, not the fact that there's a crumb rock band. What
I
is
love
it?
the
Chrome
Dubai,
room.
like Tom
That's
Cruise
not
is
surprising.
climbing up
There are
and then
lots
this.
of very weird metal derivatives. Like, I that
Yeah,
doesn't
I
shock
was
me.
in for that part. I was like, oh yeah, man. I think that was part of Warp Tour 2012.
I love Chrome Rock. All right, but I did
What'd
have
it
a
work out
story
to?
that I wanted to share with you guys today.
Please tell us a story.
Okay, before I get
What's the
into
story?
the story, 30 minutes into the podcast, how are you guys currently feeling about next gen is going to be my question. Do you feel like you know things? Are you excited? Are you ready? Like, what's the
Hang on.
general stance of the thing that's coming in a month?
That was a left turn.
Anyone?
Meh.
Yeah,
I'm
I'm not
I'm
super
not kept
hyped
up.
yet.
I don't know if it's because of just like there's other things in the world that's happening, or if it was the presentation of it and I feel out of culture because normally, like we talked about before, like at E3, it's like here it is, we're there, present for the launch. I am a bit fascinated. There's a bit of new car smell to my PC, and so I've been kind of stacking up my library and my PC, much to the chagrin and irony of Austin. But I
Wait, what?
I don't
well,
know
you
why
just
that
always-
was.
I gave him so much shit for being a PC gamer for the longest time, just because it was a fun razzing. It's like you master race PC, whatever. But I feel
I mean,
Xbox. I'm not. I feel like I'm out of that Xbox culture. I don't. Before it was like I have to get both consoles. I even felt this yesterday when they announced the iPhone. I was like, I'll get that, but it's not like let me pre-order it right now. I just don't feel that sense of urgency with gear anymore.
I mean, especially with a PC, the point is you don't need an Xbox because of Game Pass.
But you do need a PS4 or a PS5.
For the exclusives.
You know what I mean?
To play
for
their
the
exclusives,
exclusives. So the I still, I guess I'm not sold. There's a lot of things that I do. A new PlayStation has always had the same appeal to me as like an iPhone does. The second that it drops, I want it. But yeah, there's just this weird. It's not necessarily like I'm apathetic towards it or ambivalent towards it. It's just kind of like, cool, yeah, I'll see what happens. But it's not going to be like I'm counting down the days until the thing comes out. But I'm excited for what they're doing. You know what I mean? It's just for me personally, it doesn't feel like I have to get it the same day.
I'm professionally excited. Like, I think it's going to be cool.
Yeah.
Like, as a developer, like, there's definitely lots of cool stuff we'll be able to do on it that we can't do right now, which is cool. But yeah, as a consumer, I've not been able to pre-order one. So, like, I keep hoping that I probably will have a PS5 dev kit before I have a PS5, which is a really weird kind of situation if I can't get a pre-order going. But yeah, I like it.
Like, okay, fine, I'll make a game just to be able.
Fine, I'll make a game just so I can get a bloody console. Yeah. But no, it's like, yeah. On the indie side, there's a lot with specifically, it's just I can't get over the loading times. That's the thing that like excites me. I think I've said that on the show before. Like, we're going to be able to make so many different shapes of games because of this hardware. That's exciting to me, kind of on an intellectual level. That's the kind of stuff that like the game I release in 3 or 4 years will be very different because of this hardware generation. That's cool. But no, as
like
a consumer,
Miles Morales, no loading screens.
Game's so pretty too.
The Spider-Man,
So
I remember them
pretty.
showing the Spider-Man demo behind closed doors like last year or so to us, and just like, yeah, it was just like fade to black, fade up from black, that's your load. On your and I don't think players are ready for that. I don't think players are conscious that that's coming. And that, you know, a lot of very clever hardware and software to make it work, but from the developer's point of view, it's quote unquote pretty easy. From our side, there's because a lot of very talented people have made it easy for us to do so, but like that could become a relative standard in the games industry, which I don't think players necessarily are really thinking how that's going to feel different.
But that, yeah,
So
I
ready
want
for
to
that.
ping to me about that. Do you have to dev with player fatigue in mind, or do you take that into account? Like, look,
Well,
if
that's a
they've been
question.
playing,
That's a valid question. Like we're basically at a point where downtime is no longer forced by the system. It's a really smart question because we don't know yet, right? Like things like think about how much the current gen relies on like reminding you of mechanics via those little text prompts on loading screens. They're gone.
right?
Like there's a lot of weird stuff where
We'll
they're
never
gonna possibly have
reticulate
to-
splines again.
It matters though because that is downtime. And Troy's right. There is like a rhythm to games that we're gonna lose. It's like if you it's like every fundamental. It's the difference between having albums on a CD versus suddenly Spotify means you're listening to tracks. Like,
Right.
it's the whole meta structure of what you're
I don't know if you
experiencing is different.
I keep muting myself because I've got construction in the background, so sorry if my microphone's picking that up. Everyone.
That's my fault.
It just started. you building a building out here? That's cool.
We've all invested in it. It's gonna be great.
Yeah, and it's honestly they're not really building anything. They're just
making noise.
making stuff.
Yeah.
It's
Brilliant.
just
We're
making
disrupting.
noise.
We're disrupting.
Yeah.
That's what we're going for.
That's the most tech bro shit ever.
We're
When are we
redefining
going
what
again
construction
today?
is. Yeah.
Ghost of Tsushima
Is it Wednesday?
has really short load times, like crazy impressive. They had to
does.
lengthen their load times artificially because players couldn't read the tips. So I guess the problem was the tips were still showing up, but people couldn't read them, which was more jarring to people than just getting rid of them entirely. So it is totally going to be a weird adjustment thing, but I have the Series X here, and yeah, the load times are insane. It's and also quick resume, which is the thing where basically like any 5 games you can play in a month, even if you unplug the console from power, you can still quick resume. So they will just immediately load into a pause screen from wherever you last left off. And
I was seeing that.
I feel like people have not
that's
really
bananas.
understood the point. They're like, why am I going to jump between 4 games in a day? I'm like, no, it's not that. It's for the 4 games you play in a single month, which I would think most people probably play 2 maybe. They are just constantly on your pause screen. It takes maybe, I think it's about 4 seconds to load in. It's super cool.
I mean, that's
do-
so next level. I was playing Hades the other day on Switch, and I didn't realize I was low battery, and it just powered off in the middle of my game. And so I charged it overnight. And the next day, I was impressed that I was able to just resume where I'd left off, and it didn't like corrupt the save or anything to have the power go out. And I was like, that alone impresses me. But the idea of adding in multiple parallel games to that is...
Bless you.
Bless you.
Thank
But that's the thing
We
that's
heard,
interesting.
we heard nothing though. That was us.
It was amazing. Well, that's the professionalism. But it's the key thing that I think is really interesting is it goes back to what Troy's saying as well of like these are the rhythms you expect from a game. This is the language. There are, movies are the length they are because that was the optimal way to sell popcorn. It doesn't matter. That's just how long a movie is now.
It's the length of the bladder. Wasn't that Hitchcock's quote?
Yeah, exactly.
People can't hold their bladder more than 2 hours.
I know it's the height. It's basically the optimizing profitability of the screen, right? Ultimately. But what's interesting is that pattern then lives on beyond the point. It's like a vestigial. It's like the appendix, right? You don't need. Well, you do need an appendix. That's a bad example. You know what I'm saying? What's interesting here is like we have like with Solitaire when that came out, we've got like at the very start of the game there's like a little loading screen comes up with our company logo. It's like 3 or 4 seconds and then the game starts up. And during that logo, you can like click on the screen and it does like effects and stuff because it's interactive. And I saw people commenting on, wow, they've got like an interactive loading screen. It's like it's not loading anything. I just know that as a player you want like 5 seconds before the menu comes up. So it feels like you're loading up a quote unquote real game. So I'm holding you in that pattern. So it's like the Ghost of Tsushima thing. Like this, it's gonna be really interesting how we play with these lines and how we disrupt them. Imagine if you're playing a game and you've got a loading screen that you'd expect normally, but that loading screen's then interrupted by a bad guy interrupting. You know, those kind of the first time you play Assassin's Creed and you had some interactivity on the loading screens. Those kind of there's some really interesting stuff to play with when it's not
just
a technical
running in the void.
But like that, the first time that happened, that felt amazing to me.
Yeah.
That was like shit. I don't just need to look at a static screen.
I did it
So
every
there's gonna be some
time.
really interesting stuff. Yeah.
But I guess my second question would be, as a developer and also as a player, do you take into account, is there any responsibility that you have as like, all right, look, if someone were to sit and to play this game, like you have a tendency to make shorter games, but like for a game like, Death Stranding, I sound like I'm talking about games that I've been in, but these are
Troy,
very
you've been
long
in most games.
I was
in
gonna say
fairness.
that's a really
Yeah,
hard
you're
list.
games. Yeah.
Death Stranding
I think
or The
Solitaire
Last of Us.
Conspiracy is basically
True.
the only one that you can go to if you're
I think that's
avoiding.
the only game. That's the only director who
There is
didn't
an
want to
Easter
work
egg.
with
There
you.
is an Easter egg, but whatever. True story. I'm Greg Miller.
I honestly
fact
wouldn't be
that-
surprised.
No, very versatile.
It's the best
actor.
performance I've ever given. The fact that you have these incredibly long games like Death Stranding, 100 hours, Red Dead Redemption, 100 hours, Last of Us, 60 hours. Do you take into account as like, this is the part where we should probably let the player rest? Do you take that into account, or do you go, fuck it, if they want to play 60 hours straight, I'm going to make the game, I'm not going to take that into account? Or do you take into account player fatigue beyond just like reiterating
I do.
Mechanics?
I think there's an ethical responsibility when you're making stuff to not go too far with anything. But to be fair as well, the other thing is all players are different, and all players' idea of what is fatiguing is going to be wildly different, right? There's going to be like I don't play a video game for more than 2 hours, just on a personal level. Like if I spend 2 hours playing a video game straight, I start to get angsty. I start to feel like I should be doing something. I should be hanging out with my girlfriend, something, right? I should be doing something, anything other than just playing a game for 2 hours. But there are players, and definitely when I was younger, play 5 hours straight and it's not a thing. And then there are players who want only 20-minute experiences. I think the key thing for us, because this comes up, I used to work in free-to-play games years and years ago, Facebook stuff. I think there's a line you can cross as a developer where you're actively trying to encourage addictive behavior versus you're making something good that people want to keep playing, and you've got to kind of constantly challenge yourself as a developer to make sure you're on the right side of that line, that you're not, you're making mechanics that reward people for playing and they're enjoying themselves, but that they're not, trying to provoke bad behavior. You're not trying to make things that actively stick people to the screen.
But
South Park Freemium isn't free, by the way.
I also
there was an
think,
episode of South Park.
I also think that there's just the craftsmanship of storytelling and game design, where there's the ebb and flow of the actual intensity of the experience. Like when you talk about player fatigue, I go to a game like The Last of Us where the draft scene is very perfectly positioned as a low energy emotional release. Yeah, it's a long sequence, long-ish, or the museum sequence in Last of Us 2, where it's a moment to kind of decompress while not far more successfully than a loading screen concept, but just the idea that you're not out of the game, but it recharges you even while staying in the game,
But it's highly engaging, as opposed to the end of a chapter and this is a great place to set the book down. You know what I mean? Like I remember I keep bringing this book up,
Yeah,
but
true,
Dan
that's
Brown purposefully wrote his book so that
He
it could be
purposefully wrote his book? Sorry. I couldn't resist.
there was definitely an
Literary
intention.
burns.
Dan Brown did that on purpose?
Yeah, that guy was an apologist for his own shit. But he wrote it to where it was there's not a I'm just going to read a chapter tonight and close the book. It was very much of and then she walked through the door and you're like, "Well, fuck, I got to turn the page." It was meant to be
Like serialization.
yeah,
almost,
and,
like it was,
you know, purposefully provocative so that you didn't. And I, being that kind of person who has a proclivity, read the thing in one night.
Right.
So I just wonder if we have like you said, it's an interesting notion to me to say that there's an ethical responsibility without knowing. A book is a very, here's the page, boom. But you have no idea, and I guess the same way with a book, you have no idea when that person picked up that book. You have no idea when that person is picking up the game. So where you have marked is like, here's a great moment to like have a giraffe moment or have a thing where it's like, here's the end of this to where they can really set it down and walk away for a little bit. If I started playing 15 minutes before that because I got too exhausted and stopped playing before, is that just the player being the player, or is that a symptom of design that didn't take that into account?
The reality is, I think, especially for the multiplayer space, free-to-play, a lot of AAA multiplayer games are intentionally manipulating players to spend as much time as possible. And there is a game in the back end of how long does it take before this person actually spends money in this game, or like how many wins are they coming off before they spend money.
You're all poo-poo.
It's a terrifying thing that is absolutely monetized to the T. That very much is about manipulating players. That you can talk about an ethical responsibility, but I think the industry at large has ignored that responsibility entirely. And is instead,
which is why I don't do free-to-play work anymore.
But is there? What I'm saying is there an ethical responsibility when there's too many variables? You know what I mean? It's like we can't take that into account. We understand we have to let people have their own responsibility and understand their own behaviors and understand their own limitations. I'm going to make the game that I'm going to make, and I leave it up to the person's own responsibility to say, you know how to play, please play responsibly. It's the same thing as drinking, right? Drink responsibly. That is the end of our responsibility. We're not responsible for your alcohol.
If there was, but the issue is if you were a company that made booze, you're a brewery trying to make beer, and your stated and active objective was to make a new kind of beer that was more addictive than regular beer, you'd be crossing a line, right? You would be the bad guys, right? You're doing something. There's a personal responsibility. I agree with you. I think the two intersect, as in lots of areas of life, right? There are personal responsibilities on the part of the consumer. But I also think that there is an ethical way to produce as well. I think those two are in
cigarettes had that problem for the longest time, right?
You can also get addicted to something that is not designed to be addictive. Like I have a real problem with Minecraft where I can't stop playing Minecraft when I start playing Minecraft. But I don't know that Minecraft was intentionally designed to make me feel that way.
No.
I just feel that way.
I think,
but if it was, they would share some responsibility, right? If that was something that they sat down and went, how can we make Alanah,
like especially Ultimate Team? Like I think,
especially if they're aware of it, if they become aware of it, it's like, hey, do you know, like Warcraft, perfect example, when people were just like, or Second Life, when people were literally ignoring reality, and once you become aware of it, I think that you realize you have an ethical responsibility. If you put it out in the world, like people who made Minecraft, what's his name, had no idea that's what he was going to do.
I don't think so,
but at the same time, he did go a little nutso once he hit that level of success. That guy he took a pill and Ibiza, according to Mike Posner. And you know what I mean? Like, there's some people that, or the one of my favorite anecdotes is the guy who created Roulette ended up committing suicide because he realized he created a game that was so fixed. It was so wired to be purposefully.
He's the Oppenheimer of game design.
Kind of. It's like, I have become, what is it? I have become
death.
Yeah.
Destroyer of worlds.
The destroyer of worlds. So, I mean, I think that once you realize, if I make something that is like, dude, I really think people are going to enjoy this, and you're like, people aren't doing anything else but doing this, then I realize I have an ethical responsibility. But can you put that genie back in the bottle at that point?
Well, this is where I think the intent really matters, because like the point Alanah was making that I think is absolutely accurate is it depends on the model of game. Like if you're making a game like The Last of Us and you have no regulation on when and how the player consumes that, and if somebody were to just sort of go I mean, first off, it's really apples and oranges to compare like a free-to-play open-ended game to a single-player game.
Like Fortnite to Last of Us is a
yeah,
totally
exactly.
different thing.
Like one is just an open-ended, faucet. But the example that I experienced was as the Star Trek nerd, I sampled the Fleet Command mobile game, and it was very interesting to play because it was so clearly designed to like feed you breadcrumbs. I mean, it's not a bad game, but still, like I absolutely have that same addictive predisposition, like you were talking about, Troy, with reading the Dan Brown novel. Like I am exactly who they want playing that game, because they're like over the next hour you're gonna level up your ship really fast, and then we're gonna very aggressively start to slow down that pace and be like, by the way, for $1 you can skip this shit.
The Canadian devil comes out to you.
And yeah, and they have it incredibly well paced about how often they give you those little dopamine hits in order to make you go, oh, I liked that. And I guess it really is only $1 to speed that process up. Basically what I'm saying is I'm really in debt and I could use your help. I spent $40 million in Fleet Command. No, but for real, I remember I stopped playing it because I was like, I feel the hands behind the machine, like behind the curtain, very much sort of. I don't really feel like I'm playing a game. I feel like a rat in a maze a little bit.
I played so much of, or I had so many in-app purchases on Injustice that my business manager called me.
Really?
Yeah, he was like, "What is this?" And I went, it's a game, so
You're
it's
fired.
a business expense. And he was like, dude, this is a problem. Like this is too much. There was even a game.
Does that have like a currency or something you're buying, or is it just you're buying DLC? Well, I'm not familiar with their monetization.
Skins unlock characters, and what would happen is I would, as most games do, and there's so many games that do this, the big bad that you're going to go up against is just a little bit better than you. Right. So it makes it challenging as opposed, because I get bored if I'm just like demolishing people. And so if I kept getting beat by one person, I could either try to get better, which you can't, or you can pay to win. And so I didn't want, if I got a new character, it's like, well, I don't want him to be like level 6. I want him to be level 40 immediately. And so I would pay for that. So I did the same thing with GTA, because if I was going on, line or whatever, and all of a sudden people are flying around the new DeLoreans that are shooting lasers and stuff, I'm like, I don't want to grind. I want to get that now, that instant satisfaction. So I would get the Mega Sharks cards and just like, I spent, there were multiple nights where it was
Alana's so disappointed.
Yeah,
I would drop
I
$100.
don't spend any money on microtransactions at all, and I haven't for a really long time. Except for when I bought a dog in Sea of Thieves about 2 weeks ago. I was like, they got dogs. I really like rare.
I'm going to buy dogs.
I'm going to break my rule. It cost me $5 and it brought me endless happiness.
Wow,
that's like a
lot.
DLC, right?
Why
That's
the
different.
rule,
That's
though?
like a piece of content you were buying. That wasn't like a rolling.
No, I just bought the dog. So it was a piece of content in that it wasn't a loot box. I knew I put time into selecting which dog I was buying. But it wasn't like a DLC. It was just.
So you let all the other dogs die.
Basically.
Wait, so why is that a rule for you though? Did you ever, were you like me? Did you ever have a problem with it? And you're like, okay, I got to set a boundary, or just like as a philosophical thing, you're like, I don't.
Mostly as a philosophical thing, because I don't, generally speaking, support it. I don't want them in AAA video games, especially. But it is that I may have told this story before. I played this game called Habbo Hotel when I was 10, and played a lot of it. And you can basically like buy furniture and like decorate a house, and it's all online, and that's what I was doing. And I guess I didn't have concept of how it was paid for, and what I had to do was basically just call this number and put in a code and then press hash, and then there would be money in my account. So I was doing that, understanding that I was paying for it, but not understanding how that actually functioned. So my parents got a phone bill because what it was doing was charging their phone bill.
Yeah.
And I don't know, it was like maybe I'd spent like $100, which in the grand scheme of things is not a lot of money. But when They're looking at, this 10-year-old spending $100 that easily without concept of what I was doing, because the game is sort of intentionally made it that easy to do, that easy for children to do. And my parents had to talk to me about it and be like, you're spending this money. What the hell are you doing? And obviously they understood it wasn't malicious. But from that point onwards, as a 10-year-old, I was like, I don't spend extra money on a video game. And I think I just tried to stick to it ever after that. So I just try not to. I also generally don't buy a lot of DLC. Just a thing where, there's people who've spent like $2,000 on Fortnite or cleaned out their parents' bank accounts because that's the way it works. And I don't know how much the ethics of those things are going to evolve, but
League of Legends
is
I have friends who have spent thousands in League of Legends, but it's one of those that I don't know. To me, there are interesting ways to do the free to play model that are not like that basically invite someone to a different experience. But is fundamentally kind of non-judgmental to the freeloaders, because there is that the kind of more old school mentality, it seems like to me, at least from the conversations I've sort of eavesdropped on projects that I've been on, where it seems like, it's they're basically the older school mentality is the obsession over the whales, right? The people like that one in every 10,000 people that spends boatloads on the game and then basically subsidizes it for the rest. So the game is tripping over itself to make those people feel like kings and queens, like you are keeping this thing alive. And
what is it?
Star Citizen? Is that a thing? Is that
out yet?
Is that
No, but people have spent I think the most expensive ship was $9,000 or something.
Is that any different though than golf? It's a digital version of the same thing where people are in this relentless pursuit to always be better. And so there's this obsession with, well, if I get this club or if I get these balls, if I get, then this will make my game better because that's what this person has.
It's like golf if the golf company controlled gravity.
But do they not? Okay, do they not kind of posit that they do? Because they say the design of this, and by now using a titanium shaft, what this actually can do is work on the flow. Do they not in some way present that they can?
Well, no, I think the difference is that the company that sells you the golf club is making better products to deal with the situation of playing golf. The difference here is that basically in free to play you create the supply and the demand.
Yeah, I think Mike's analogy would be if you go to the golf course,
if you made gravity worse.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, if the golf course could make
after a month gravity starts
twice as big instantaneously when they saw, and it's even more so because what it is they see you coming and they go, it's Moneybags Troy. Troy bought the expensive golf clubs. Quick, let's make gravity a bit worse.
Are you related to Moneybags?
Players feel special is certainly just a part of it too. It's you get a cool looking ship, so you feel like you're better than everyone else, and then they just keep increasing that tier of cooler looking ships.
Isn't default now a schoolyard criticism? Don't they on their kids now who will criticize other kids and call them default?
It's a thing in Fortnite where if you're a default skin, you're basically a noob.
But in school, they're a kid. That's now an insult.
That's some Ready Player One shit right there.
Yeah.
For real.
That is Ready Player One. You're 100% right.
I mean, NPC is an insult.
Back in Texas, in 2000, it was 2002 or 2003. It was 2003, because in 2003, Chris Moneymaker won, or 2002, Chris Moneymaker won the World Series of Poker. And he had never sat down at a live game. And he sat down and won the final event, main table, won the whole thing, got the ring. Never happened before. It was insanity. And at that moment, World Series of Poker changed their branding to anyone can win. And so all of a sudden, you had this big boom of people playing Texas Hold'em.
Oh, yeah.
And in Texas, you had to drive all the way to Oklahoma or all the way to Louisiana, 3 hours or maybe an hour and a half from Dallas to Oklahoma if you wanted to play poker. And so there was this big boom of people wanting to play poker, and they were doing home games, but people didn't want to be in their homes drinking. They wanted to be out in bars. So being the industrious entrepreneur that I am, I was like, well, what if we did this? What if what's illegal about it is the gambling? So you don't actually use money, but you can rent chips. So what we would do is we would go into it was me and
There's an outstanding warrant for your arrest, isn't there?
I was going to say this is series 4 of Deadwood.
No. It was completely legal.
Statute
So what
of
we would do-
limitations has expired.
we would go into a bar and we would say, here's the deal. We're going to provide the table, the chips, the chairs, and the dealer. And we'll give you a cut. We'll give you a 10% cut of the table every night. And they would look at us like, what is like, this is what we do on a Wednesday night. Just people come in. If they're sitting here, they're having people stay, they drink. It's good for you. It's good for us. And they're like, all right. And what would happen is for the first 2 weeks, we would sit there in a corner, and it was the saddest little one-act play you could find. It would be, it was my girlfriend, or we had 2 other people, but always a female dealer. Very, very specific reason why. And they would sit there at the table by themselves, and then somebody would walk over and go, "Are you doing Hold'em?" They're like, "Yeah." And it's like, "Well, I want to play." It's like, okay, so it's a $20 buy-in to rent chips, and that gets you $20 gets you $500 worth of play or whatever. And they're like, I'm not going to do that. And then somebody would get drunk enough one night after about 2 weeks and come in and go, I'll play. And you come over here and play with me. And it's like, well, do I just buy him for 20? It's like, you can buy him for how much you want. It's like, well, I'll buy him for 40. And so now all of a sudden the other guy is short stacked. And so he would buy him for 40. And then other people would come around. And by the end of it, there would be 10 people. We would have a full table every night, and everybody was buying in for $100.
Damn.
Sometimes multiple times
6
a
years
night.
in prison later, you started feeling that.
So
Tyler.
His
But
name
you-
wasn't
that
Troy
is-
Baker
I mean,
in those days.
But it was
you were definitely
completely
breaking
legal
some
because
laws
you-
there, right?
you're doing the thing that they couldn't do is give away alcohol or do any kind of thing to promote it. But we were just doing a chip rental just the same way you do with billiards or anything else. You're not actually gambling because there was no gambling because they were using fake money to gamble. But the thing that we knew is
I
the
love how well
second-
articulated the law must be that if you just insert like an arbitrary
A stopgap.
proxy in the middle,
Yep.
Oh, for
it no
sure.
longer counts.
Because like part of the law with gambling, and I think like casinos are really exploitative. Like I some of my family opened up the first casino in Australia, so I feel like I like as a kid was in casinos a lot, and like they taught me how to play blackjack like from a really young age. We're like, we're gonna make money when you're old enough.
In my head, it's the 30s as well. Like, it's definitely the 30s. Hey,
Yeah,
Alanah,
it's-
get over here.
What's your
pretty much.
view of casinos? Are you like casinos are great?
Hate them.
them.
Absolutely hate them. And I think it's because if you're there enough, and especially like growing up, I was allowed because I was escorted by the manager. You just see like people piss themselves, ruin their lives. You hear all the stories of all the awful shit that's happened.
Yeah.
Where people try to sue the casino for their money back, and you can't. Like, I hate it. And I feel like microtransactions are similar, but the issue is the government makes so much money off of casinos that they're not going to ever try to regulate them in the same way that countries like I think it's Belgium have with microtransactions. It's just free reign, and it's terrifying.
Well, where do you think the line falls in terms of individual responsibility? That's always the thing that I
It's a great
circle
question,
back to
Austin. I have to go.
So do I.
Summon. Super interesting conversation, but the article I wanted to bring up with you guys was David Cage thinks having 2 next-gen Xbox consoles is confusing for developers and players.
Who?
David Cage, who? I know has
Wow.
beef with Xbox. I was
That's
basically going to
cold.
ask you guys if you thought, just give me real quick answer here. Do you think that having multiple units on this launch of next gen has made people less excited?
I don't know.
Because I feel like
Sales
the
are gonna
next gen
determine
hype is
that.
not necessarily there, and I wondered if that's why.
I think there's
Like
some
the-
other mitigating factors that might impact the sales of an Xbox in 2020, to be honest. I think there's probably bigger mitigating reasons
Maybe
that
it's
people
that.
might not be excited.
Other than the fact that for years, Xbox and PlayStation have done this. I don't think it's the fact that they're launching at the same time. They've always done this.
No, I mean that there are 2 of each of them.
Like the
And digital at
digital
the
and
same
the
time, I guess.
As opposed to like the PlayStation Slim and the PlayStation Gigantic and the Xbox S and the Xbox. All that
Yeah,
stuff.
usually being years
I will
apart.
I will say there's one big thing that I wonder. I've not spoken to many console-specific developers about this, but I do wonder if, for someone like in David Cage's position, where he's used to running a company that is predominantly a console company, like they do PC ports, of course, after the fact, but they're definitely console first. the idea of an insecure platform, a platform that can shift and change and have different specs and everything, might be scarier. Because that's one of the coolest things about developing for console is you know exactly what your hardware is. So you can absolutely milk it for all the graphical juice you can get.
Yeah,
he
said he thinks it's confusing for developers and players.
I think it's confusing for console developers for sure. Like,
he said most developers will focus on a lower end version to avoid doing two different versions, and I get that too.
I would argue that PC developers have been taking that kind of stepped approach for 10,
I think they are a PC developer now since they sold to a Chinese company, which is interesting. But I have to run, everyone.
Oh, that's cool.
Well, congrats, Mike. We didn't say it on the show.
Congrats, man. Congrats. I had a question for you, but I'll ask it next week. Because I don't want to talk to you throughout the week.
I don't want to have a conversation with you if we're not like on YouTube monetizing it. That's
too good of a question.
There's no point.
All right, I'll see you guys next week.
Bye.